and watch movies, but like that's one of those holy shit kind of things. Like that's real.
Yeah.
People do that.
It's its own, like Scientology is definitely its own. I don't even know. It's like, not even. It's like crazy is like an understatement for it.
Yeah, it's like another level. Yeah.
All right, so we are going to be live on Facebook here in like 3 seconds.
Okay, cool.
So we can go ahead and go.
All right, great. All right, I will just do a quick intro and then we'll start talking. Okay, this afternoon we are thrilled to be joined by Jon Stewart. Jon is a former professional musician. Many of you might know him from the band Sleeper, and now is a senior lecturer on popular culture and popular music. He blogs about his 14 years as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous and ongoing developments in the post-AA recovery community. Jon, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on. It's really nice to meet you.
You too. So to get started, I mean, I always kind of like to ask people pretty much like, what brought you here talking to us? Like, why are we having this conversation today? And I mean, I'm sure with even just the conversation we were having before we started recording, you have a lot of stories to tell. And like the reason you reached out to us, which I'm so glad that you did, to talk about your experience with AA and recovery in more of a secular sense. But I guess I want to get a little bit of your backstory first of like what brought you to the point of, AA and recovery. But you want to talk about music a little first? Like life in in a Britpop band?
All the things.
All the things.
I grew up in the north of England in a city called Sheffield, which is a sort of an industrial area, and my formative experience was the miners' strike. There was a big miners' strike in the UK in the 1980s, and I went to university, and I was very kind of SJW type, and met a sort of a hot young girl there, and she was very exotic. She was a southerner. She was from London, and she was Jewish, and I'd never met any sort of non-Caucasian.
We are taking this to a different podcast, I feel like.
Yeah, no, for me that was incredible. I was like, wow, look at this. She's gorgeous and exotic, and she'd just come back from Israel. And I was from Yorkshire, which is a very sort of closed community, industrial sort of white working class, really. And we started a band and got a record deal, and she was the singer in Sleeper. And had a platinum album and a gold album, and with a couple of tracks on Train Spotting. And I was pretty kind of left wing and very much an atheist. I'm very kind of interested in science and progressive stuff. So then the band finished it was sort of towards 2000 after 3 albums, and we toured the world and everything, and it was great. But throughout the whole time, I'd been kind of drinking and doing other recreational stuff. And it's an interesting industry, the music business. I mean, one of the people at the record company, having just signed us and spent a load of money on the band, celebrated by giving me my first ever introduction to cocaine, which is one of the world's most addictive substances, which I've often thought was a very interesting way to do business, to kind of invest in a product or a person and then give them a very, very damaging new hobby. And so I really needed to get sober after the band, and lived in LA for a while. I went to some AA meetings out there, because everybody's sober in LA, and came back to the UK and found a very kind of vibrant group of Alcoholics Anonymous in the summer of 2000 in London, and that was just an incredible experience. It was a very, very vibey group, lots of really sort of young, sort of professional people. And it was quite a fundamentalist AA group, and I seem to need that. I seem to need that structure. And as a result of working the 12 steps of AA, I had a profound spiritual experience, and I found sobriety, and I found much more. I found a new way of life, and I found God as it's understood in AA, which is quite a wide concept. And it helped me stay sober. And then I became a lecturer and took a teaching qualification and then a master's degree, and I'm now doing a PhD. And AA is a great place to get sober. I'm very much in favour of it. I'm not anti-AA, but I did also I went from being this sort of atheist, northern British sort of socialist sort of type who doesn't believe in God because God is the opiate of the masses, to being very spiritual. And I prayed every day for 14 years. And then after sort of 13, 14 years, I lost my faith. I read a book. I read Bart Ehrman's The Historicity of Jesus, because I'm a historian. And as part of the 11th step, which is to bring yourself closer to your higher power, I thought I'll read a history book on Jesus. And
good
that
idea,
made me
right?
realize, yeah, not so good, not so good. That kind of made me realize that I was like, oh, probably shouldn't have read that. And then I watched, because AA is founded on a thing called the Oxford Group, which is an attempt to live as first century Christians. That's why I was interested in the Jesus thing. And then I watched a video by Andy Thompson, who's an evolutionary psychologist, and he explains faith through evolutionary psychology, called Why We Believe in Gods. And I opened the computer as a person of faith, having prayed every day for 13 years at that point, and I closed it 45 minutes later. As a YouTube video finished, I closed it as an atheist again. It was like that. And it was the most profound experience of my life after getting sober. And I realized that all our notions of spirituality are fake. And they're very convincing because they meet our evolutionary needs to communicate and to bond together. And there's lots of parallels with food, the way that we respond to sugar and fats and salt and alcohol. That's evolutionary psychology has a lot of explanation for alcoholism as well.
And so, go ahead.
At that point, I stopped attending AA and I wrote a blog essay about it, and ended up doing a bit of media. And I speak at skeptics in the pub groups and humanist groups and things like that. So that's me. So
you talked about how you were an atheist up until kind of the, starting AA. Then, because reading some of what you've written, then you prayed for the first time when you joined AA. And then, you were in this program. And so just, like an idea that I think came up in something that I was reading that you wrote, but then also have talked about with other people, is that like sometimes people trade kind of this like addiction for something else, where like, like people might be alcoholics and then they pick up other things, like whether it's smoking and or AA or just really something else to replace that.
Yeah,
do you
very much
feel
so.
like that's something that happens?
Yeah, definitely. And it's really interesting because the debate, you'll find lots of people who knock AA. There's plenty of people that will bash AA, and I'm not one of those, but because I think the debate's much more nuanced than that. And there's no question that in-group thinking can be very powerful. And when you go to meetings, there's lots of chemicals going on in your brain, like dopamine, the expectation of meeting people and having a relaxing time and making contact with people.
Meeting people sounds like the absolute worst thing.
It puts a lot of people off, the group stuff. Yeah, not so much as there are three things that put people off AA: being in groups, the God stuff, and the abstinence. And actually, you can get sober without any of those three things today, which we can chat about later. But the power of the group, it was a year before my first and my second meeting, The first time you go, it's a little bit overwhelming. And then things got so desperate that I thought I'm going to have to give this a go. And you just get welcomed into the group. And they say things like very simple messages like, just keep coming back, come to another meeting tomorrow, and go to 90 meetings in 90 days and things like that. So once you get involved in that, you get a whole new circle of friends. You learn a whole new set of sort of cultural memes and ideas, and you become part of a new circle. And groups can do things together that individuals can't do, in lots of positive ways, and of course in lots of negative ways as well. And so they're very helpful. A lot of studies, AA wasn't based on any science, but a lot of scientific studies since AA have demonstrated the power of group support in obtaining and maintaining long-term sobriety. Very, very helpful. But I kind of mistook it in AA because it's so spiritual. I used to think sort of God was entering the room, or there's a sort of a sense of God's presence. The group conscience is the representation of your higher power in the room. And I believed all that, because you're very vulnerable when you're alcoholic in a rock bottom, and the first time I went, I was like, well, this is great for these guys, but it's not going to work for me. And then the second time I went, I was truly desperate. I was looking at homelessness and stuff like that, and things had gotten really bad. And at that point I was like, okay, which way's Mecca? Just point me in the direction I've got and push me and I'll go, because you'll do anything. And it's quite a gentle slope that you start, and gradually, if you're emotionally and physically and invested in it, and you're sober and it's working for you, then it could be quite easy to get carried along. And I was in a wonderful group, very, very loving, very caring, but also in a lot of ways quite spiritual. And I just went for it because it was helping me abstain, so I could see the results from it. And AA is based a lot on William James, which is this idea of having to have rock bottom, and then his famous book on the psychology of religious experiences, which is you have to sort of have your ego crushed, and at that point you'll have a spiritual experience. And that's very much how the founders of AA considered it, and it's still alive.
And so
traditions, I think, still alive.
And what did like, as much as you're comfortable sharing here, like what did that moment look like for you? Like how did you know that was it and you had to do something more?
Well, there's a weird, anybody with a drink problem, I would just say, keep looking, because there's never been a better time to find recovery than now. There's so many options available. But in the 2000s, there wasn't that much around. It was before, it was before like all the new atheist movement and stuff like that. And for an alcoholic, if you're approaching, or a lot of people don't hit rock bottom, they get there and they just bounce along for years, sometimes decades. So you're in this situation where life isn't going very well, and you think the drink is the only thing holding you together. It's not the problem. And then you meet other people who are sober, and they're not afraid to talk about the bad things that happened to them when they drank, because they're through that now. And that's very impressive. And you're meanwhile going out there doing all these problem behaviors and destroying your relationships and friendships and financially, and you're not able to support yourself, and you drink a lot, you will lose your mind eventually, so your judgment's going and things like that. And you might be in a situation where you've been doing that for years or maybe decades, and then you meet healthy people who used to drink like you drank and now don't, and they did because they're not shy to tell you about it. That's a very, very powerful thing. So in a lot of ways, the worse your drinking is, the better AA, the more AA works, because you just hit that moment of surrender. And surrender is a big word, I think, in AA, in the program. This idea of giving up your will and going by the will of whatever your higher power is, and really, really throwing yourself into the 12-step program. And once you get to that point, once you've had enough physical and mental pain, whether that's humiliation of losing friends or behaving badly, or all the things that happen to drunks, then you're ready for it.
And so you had talked about, or Natalie had brought it up, just like replacing one addiction with another, and like in your case, it kind of manifested through like this spiritual, religious experience that you had. Like, I mean, I don't know. Like personally, I don't see that as being untrue. I think anytime you have, because I know I have an addictive personality. Those of us like that, like I have to find something to replace things with. And one of the healthy things I did was this podcast and this, the blog that I have. Like, what are your, like, do you think that's necessarily a bad thing as it stands with AA? Or
lots of people get in recovery and get really heavily into exercise. But the way it works in AA is they just say, keep going back to the meetings. So people will go to meetings every day. I went to a meeting every day for about 200 days. And
is it like an accountability thing? Like where you're just...
a sign of commitment. It's a sign of your commitment to your sobriety, and you will meet people who will help you stay sober. And if you go to a meeting, you're far less likely to drink that day. And if you've been drinking every day for 4 or 5 years, then going to a meeting is not that much of an investment in your time. And it's a demonstration to yourself that you really want this. So it does work very well. And then you get inured to it, and you buy into all the little practices, like the moment of reflection at the start of a meeting and the serenity prayer. In America, many have the Lord's Prayer at the end, which often shocks British people when they go to American AA meetings.
Yeah.
So you buy into these little practices. There's a wonderful part in the Andy Thompson book on the evolutionary psychology of religion about minimally counterintuitive worlds. So if I tell you that the tree in your town square, if you go to it at midnight on a certain day and recite a certain saying, it will do your taxes, put $1,000 in your bank, clean your house, valet your car, you won't believe me. But if you go and say you rub the bark at a certain date, something fortunate might happen to you that you're not quite sure what it is, you're more likely to believe it. And AA often works like that. So you look for small
more of a
signs.
horoscope.
Yeah, you look for small signs of a higher power working in your life to help you stay sober, because that's, if you're of that fundamental religious type of AA, you genuinely believe you have an interventional higher power in your life helping you stay sober. And if you can't get sober of your own volition, it has to be that. What else could it be? I tried to get sober. I said never again thousands of times, and then by the end of the same day I was drunk. And then I had to turn it over to a higher power, and all of a sudden I'm sober.
And there you go. It worked, right?
And also, you really don't want to get drunk again. So you don't want to question that stuff. You're in it. You're like, okay, I'm pedaling this invisible bicycle and it seems to be going somewhere. So let's just keep pedaling, because this is way better than the life I used to have.
So then you have, you're in this for so many years, and then you read Bart Ehrman, and then you watch a video and you close your computer and it's like, yeah, I'm an atheist. What happens with your feelings about AA and this life that you've been living?
Well, you go through kind of obviously there's like it's like being on a swing set. So you go, whoa, that was really weird. And you want to explain it, and you can get a bit resentful about it. And then gradually you reach this point of equilibrium, which is really grateful for the opportunity to be sober. But also I started researching what had happened to me. So I read up the Andy Thompson stuff, and I found a brilliant website called recoveringfromrecovery.com, which is run by a guy in London here, that was all about moving healthily out of groups like AA. And I read up on Robert J. Lifton's criteria for thought reform, which is a brilliant piece of work on American soldiers returning home from captive soldiers returning from the Korean War in the 50s, and how they'd been subject to thought reform, and lots of the group practices in many groups, not just AA, obviously groups, high control groups all subscribe to it, but many quite much more subtly practices in AA mirror the Lifton's criteria for thought reform. And so I started to understand the mechanism of what had happened. And initially I was terrified that I'd drink again because I'd kind of burst the bubble. And that was 3.5 coming up for 4 years ago, and I haven't, and I just keep active in other ways. So I think the thing that made me the thing I found most difficult to deal with is what we now know about alcoholism and some of the alternatives that are out there. Now, there's a fantastic thing called the Sinclair method, which seems to have something like 75% success rate, which doesn't involve meetings, doesn't involve having a spiritual awakening, and doesn't even involve abstinence. So you take a pill, usually naltrexone, an hour before you drink, and you can control your drinking. So because there's no meetings or spiritual program or abstinence, it's anathema to AA. And no one, 99.9% of the people I know in AA have never heard of it. But it's far more successful than AA. It's been used in Finland for 20 years. 20 years. Thousands of people have found recovery. It was developed by an American doctor in Finland because that's where they do all the research on rats and mice and addiction. And think over the last 20 years, how many Americans and British people and people all over the world have died from alcoholism and never heard the words the Sinclair method. And
well, I hadn't heard of it until I read until I was reading your stuff. So I had not heard of it. And for me, and I don't know, Dan, if it goes the same for you, I mean, I hear alcoholism and recovery and I just automatically go to AA. Like I think AA.
Yeah.
I mean, and I would guess that the majority of people think about that. And knowing like just the three of us here, I mean, do not have any substance problems, but if I did, I would probably, as an atheist, feel very wary of going to such a spiritual group. So this is why, just curious to hear some of your other thoughts about like, what are the options?
I think more than anything that made me a little bit cross because it was like, okay, I got sober nearly 17 years ago. The Sinclair method was in existence at that time. So I could have actually just gone and got some medication and I wouldn't have had to go to all the meetings. I've probably been to 2,000 AA meetings over the years. And I wouldn't have had to sit and listen to all that stuff. And also I wouldn't have had to have a fake spiritual awakening. And I could have gone and done some cognitive behavioral therapy, which I did when I quit AA, which was very good and very helpful in other ways. And what really sort of is sad is in showbiz, everybody's in recovery in AA, and because it's a romantic story and it's the battle and the very AA people are often very self-absorbed and they're part of that sort of, we now have this sort of oppression Olympics going on in various groups, and there's no question that alcoholics are like, oh, I'm in recovery and triggering and all that stuff. And a lot of what AA does that's good is it stops that kind of thinking. It's all about not going along those lines. It was set up by a very hardcore conservative Republican guy, although it's not political. But you take responsibility for your own action. Now, AA hasn't taken responsibility for its actions as a group because part of the 12 traditions, which are what guide AA's practices, you don't talk about any other form of recovery. You don't endorse any other form of recovery. So if I went into an AA meeting and I started saying, are you guys that are new, you could try this method that would help you. It might save some of your lives. Many of you people, AA is not going to work for you, and you're going to die drunk. but you could try the Sinclair method, I'd probably be asked to leave.
Just because you're talking about something else.
Because I'm talking about a different form of recovery, and AA doesn't endorse other forms of recovery. And because the Sinclair method doesn't involve meetings, doesn't involve spiritual program, and doesn't involve abstinence. So it both goes against everything that AAs believe in the kind of culty mindset that some have. Certainly I had. And it's another form of recovery that you're not really supposed to talk about, or certainly you're not supposed to endorse or recommend. Now, the times have changed since the traditions were written in the 1940s, and you can go into an AA meeting and you'll find a pamphlet or literature for just about any group, even atheists now. It took them a long time to do it. It took them 40 years to come up with an atheist pamphlet. It was proposed in 1974 and it came out in 2014 in the United States. That's how long it took to write.
Slow going.
And it's not very good. But you will not find a pamphlet saying, here's some other things that work, and here's the Sinclair. And that I think is heartbreaking. And I think about people like Amy Winehouse, who drank herself to death without, I would bet my life, without having never heard of the Sinclair method, and would have been seen by all the best doctors in London and had £1 million house and 7 million albums sold or whatever it was, and millions of fans around the world, and died, drank herself to death without ever having heard the words, the Sinclair method. Isn't that tragic? That's just obviously one example, but there are millions of others.
Well, it is. I mean, because I think we often associate recovery with AA, with complete abstinence, with just, and then if you can't do that,
and even
then,
here in the and even here in the U.S., like it has been ordered as part of a substance. Like if you have like a DUI or like driving under the drinking and driving, some judges have ordered it as actual treatment. Which I mean, you look at the success rate, and it's anywhere between 5 and 15% for AA, as opposed to Sinclair method, like what you mentioned. It's, at least from what they're reporting, is somewhere around 80%, which is a substantial difference.
And even with Sinclair method, about 50% of the people control their drinking, and then about 25% stop. So you could actually, if the only requirement for membership in AA is the desire to stop drinking, and lots of people use the Sinclair method because they want to stop. So technically they are entitled to go to meetings. They are entitled to have the access to the wonderful community of people that are trying to be sober and all that stuff. And ironically, if we take sort of 20% as roughly AA's success rate, the Sinclair method is actually more successful than AA if its figures are to be believed, even though that's not the ultimate goal of the program. So it's very, the other things have happened as well, like there's a massive growth in atheist AA, and that happened in Toronto, where the local AA group, the organizational, they're called intergroups, they tried to ban the atheist meetings because they felt you couldn't be atheist and be AA, and because the atheists wanted to change the steps and maybe white out the word God that's on the scrolls on the walls and stuff. So they were evicted from the local intergroup, and as a result they started a website just so people could find where the meetings were. And there's now 2 fantastic atheist AA websites. One's called AA Agnostica and the other one is called AA Beyond Belief, and they're a fantastic resource. So the other thing that's happened since I got sober is there is now an amazing repository of information online for atheists who want to get sober in AA. So you don't need to go through the same journey that I went through. I found a very active group of people who were all spiritual. I couldn't find any atheists who were staying sober. Now you can, and you can do that through online meetings and the groups. There's many atheist meetings now in the big cities in America, in some cities in Europe. France has a big atheist AA. Paris has a big atheist AA meeting, and so you can still benefit from the group support, and that's all because the main group in Toronto tried to censor the atheists in recovery there. They went online and they just found a huge audience for themselves. And very recently, a couple of weeks ago, the Canadian Human Rights Commission deemed that it was illegal what the Toronto AA intergroup had done. So they have to recognize them now. And also that could well have international repercussions. So any atheist AA group can start up and can blot out the word God in the steps and reproduce them that way, it seems. So that could be a sea change in the opportunities for atheists to get sober in AA as well. So there's a lot of good stuff going on.
And
that's good because yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I think it's important just for us to say that we're not saying don't go to AA, don't do this, because ultimately I think however you get to the end of not being addicted and getting beyond that and being able to control it, I think is great. However you get to there, that's the ultimate goal. And be it through like you said, behavior therapy, or through AA, or through one of these other options, whatever's working for you, stay with that and work with that. It's what we're trying to do is just make people aware that, AA does not have a monopoly on this, and it's not, statistically, and like what research shows us, not very effective.
And but there are options.
Yeah. So the atheists in AA groups, really big. I would recommend anyone to still go to AA. The atheist and AA groups are huge now, really worth supporting. The Sinclair method and smart recovery is another option, which is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy based recovery. And they're having a lot of success, and they're growing pretty quickly as well. And I would recommend try it all, do everything. There's never been more help available. If somebody's watching this and they're struggling, or they have a friend or a family member who's struggling, just try it all and look at the blogs and read all the blogs and the podcasts, and there's so much out there that you can find now. It's great. It's a good time to be looking for recovery, however you want to do it.
And now a question I have for you is, okay, so there's the resources for people in recovery, sort of like the professional resources, whether that's like CBT or whether it's, the community of groups. For people who might be friends or partners of somebody who is in recovery, how do you support that person the best way possible?
Yeah, good question, and because it's a tricky one, because you don't want to enable people, which is often what happens. And there is a support group for people who are partners of people in recovery, which is called Al-Anon, which is the sort of the family group for AA members. And that's a little bit, it's very much like AA in that it's quite spiritual. So I've had friends go there and just not really enjoyed it because they've just felt, well, I don't belong here. This isn't my thing. Yeah. So I think that's probably the next stage along, is for the amount of support that's out there now for atheists looking for recovery. There's no excuse for somebody who's an atheist. You can't use the excuse I used to use, which was I'm an atheist, I don't want to go to AA. Because there's atheist AA and there's smart recovery and there's all those other things. So the next stage, once that's become more commonly known, would be, okay, what can we do for families and friends? And I think at the moment, the sort of 12-step Al-Anon AA family group type, those ideas still very much cornered that market because it's culturally very powerful. What we need is a character in a television show to get sober in smart recovery or using the Sinclair method.
Yeah.
And we don't need another AA character in a movie. There's hundreds of, and the reason why that happens is because all the actors and writers and film producers are all in bloody AA. So and also because it's a fantastic drama, struggling with the booze and sharing your heart out at meetings. It makes for good drama. But the truth is we need more accessibility and more information and more balance in the media. But because of the slightly culty thinking of AA, that's probably not going to happen. There
Because
is,
it's kind of permeated all the culture.
It'll take a while. It'll take a while. There's a fantastic film about the Sinclair method I meant to mention called One Little Pill by Claudia Christian, the sci-fi actress. That is a superb piece of work. She funded it herself. It's just brilliant. I don't know Gary, the British guy who's in it. He's doing really well, and still, a few years on. And if you've got questions about the Sinclair method, the sinclairmethod.com is a good website, and One Little Pill, the movie, which is on Vimeo, is really, really worth checking out.
Yeah, I think just being able to like shine some light on some of the other options that are out there, that if you don't want to give yourself over powerlessly to the higher power and AA in that regard, that like we all kind of know it, that there are other places for people to turn and other ways to do this. And so that's why like I'm really glad that we've been able to talk to you about it. And I mean, and we'll put a link to like your blog and everything, because it's fantastic. It's like, I learned so much just from reading that I didn't know before. So, I mean, that resource being there for people who, might be going through something where like they don't know what the next step is.
And it's a really interesting time for it, because there's all the, we're at an age. Dan Dennett, who's one of the Four Horsemen guys, he wrote this really good piece in a book chapter called something, the pulpit, escaping the pulpit, or one of those. It's about priests losing their faith, and he did a YouTube speech on it about the age of digital transparency, and it's not really been picked up on that much, but it's a fantastic essay on how digital technology is exposing previously closed forms of thought, whether it's the Big Book of AA or the Scientology stuff or the Mormons, or all these privileged forms of knowledge are now being picked apart because we can communicate in ways that we never could before, and we can examine ideas and test things, and I think this is part of that movement. So it's a very exciting time to be alive, because you would have had to be pretty brave to stand up to Scientology, and now anybody can do it on a YouTube channel. There's a brilliant talk on how the Book of Mormon disproved Mormonism by a guy who I think he's a graduate student, and he puts the Book of Mormon through plagiarism software, the kind that you have at universities. Yeah, and huge chunks of it come from a school book on French history from 1820 or something like that. It's a superb piece. It's a presentation on YouTube, takes about an hour. It's a stunning piece of work about where Joseph Smith stole a lot of phrases from. Just little 4 and 5 word phrases that come from this school book on Napoleon that nobody knows about, because all books have been from that period have been digitized now. And we could never have done that. Would have been a lifetime's work for someone a generation ago. And this is a grad student doing it in his spare time over a year on Google Books. So it's very exciting time in terms of how science and communication is working to sort of free people from all kinds of different ideas.
Well, and when you're reading, I was going to say, when you're reading things out of a hat, though, you only have very limited options.
Yeah.
He was reading a book on Napoleon out of a hat. Like, come on.
Exactly.
Obviously, this is what happened.
Even that now, you can go online and you can see the stone, to see a stone, because they were sort of forced to show the pictures of it, which would be a pilgrimage to even go to get to see that, a lifelong pilgrimage. So it's really interesting how I think that's opening things up. And I think the future for recovery is very bright, especially what evolutionary psychology offers in terms of explanations for things, particularly alcoholism. That really helped me to understand that. And you don't hear that in AA. No one will say, well, you have fruit and yeast, and the byproduct, the yeast eats the sugar of the fruit, and then the alcohol keeps the fruit ripe for that little bit longer on the vine. And then an early hominin from 2 million years ago will smell the alcohol and be attracted to it. And we have color vision, so we can see a ripe grape from one that's going to poison us. And it's the reward systems that responded to that, hence alcoholism today. We have hypersensitive reward systems for alcohol because of early hominins from hundreds and thousands of years ago learning to survive on ripe fruit, which was obviously a very valuable item. So only the people with hypersensitive reward systems to that survived and got the calories they needed. And this is all in a book called The Drunken Monkey by Professor Robert Dudley, who's in one of the California universities. And that came out in 2011, and it's been virtually ignored until about 2 issues ago on the National Geographic. It was a cover story of National Geographic 5 years after it was published.
Yeah.
So evolutionary psychology is really interesting in how this is breaking through and challenging some of our old ideas. And you won't hear any of that in AA. Because AA sees alcoholism as a defect of character. It's not. It's a maladapted one-time evolutionary advantage. It's a significant advantage in evolutionary terms to be sensitive to alcohol. And we now, so that allows you, for people who are struggling with their weight, it's the same thing. It's sugar sensitivity. It's a good thing. We're just maladapted. It allows you to rethink it and have a bit less blame about it as well.
And so it's about bringing different pieces into the conversation about addiction, and not just subscribing to AA and that's it. But it just seems like, kind of in short summary, I mean, there are options out there for people, and there are good parts of AA, which obviously, like in your case, help. Too bad it wasn't an atheist AA group, but that, community and all of that, whatever kind of accountability that comes with it, seemed helpful. But that there are all these other options out there, and we'll put together something for our notes, for our show notes for this episode when it comes out, just as far as resources go for people and stuff. Now, I kind of want to end on just a couple fun questions for from a music point of view.
Well, this hasn't been exciting and uplifting and
well, it's uplifting because John is here talking to us so many years after, I guess, hitting rock bottom. And I am glad that you are here talking to us. And I have a question for you from a music standpoint.
Okay.
Because I just like to know this about people. Give me a few of your all-time favorite albums.
Doolittle by the Pixies is the album
Fantastic.
that made me want to be in a band. Desire by Bob Dylan is the album that made me want to be a songwriter. And then Freewheeling by Bob Dylan, I discovered that later. And probably Revolver by the Pixies. I mean, I'm fairly standard stuff.
It's good. It's good stuff. It's all good stuff.
The album there's 2 albums from the 90s when we were playing with bands that we toured with, and we toured with them partly because we didn't feel they were getting the recognition they deserved. But there's a band called the Long Pigs.
Oh,
and their
yeah.
album was The Sun Is Often Out, and I think that's the greatest album of the 90s for me. It's a superb album. If you haven't heard that album, buy it, and if you don't like it, I'll send you the money that you paid for it. It's a wonderful record. Sadly, Dee, the drummer, passed away a few weeks ago, but he's a wonderful drummer. We toured with them. They were great. And Madder Rose, who were a New York sort of art rock, sort of post-Velvet Underground band from that period. Their first 2 albums are beautiful. Mary Lawson, the singer, has the most incredible voice. I think she's kind of part Cherokee or something. She's a very distinguished looking woman, and she just had an incredible singing voice. And then the band were really noisy and feedback and distorted guitars, and they play super slow songs as well, really slow, with this kind of haunting, melodic, beautiful female singer over the top. So anything Madder Rose, first 2 Madder Rose albums are gorgeous. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I just always, I mean, I like to know that about everybody, but especially we have a musician talking to us, so I needed to ask that question. Okay, so, and now I have to ask future plans. What's next for you?
So I've done loads of podcasts on this subject and spoken a lot, and I'd like to do a book on it, just a short book, after sort of all the conversations I've had, because I wrote the blog essay and then it was featured in the Guardian, and then I wanted to just test my ideas in public, which I've kind of done for about the last 3 years now. So I think that's time. I've got to finish some other academic work I'm doing first, and then I'll do that. And then with the band, we've got some reunion shows this summer, so hopefully we'll do occasional festivals and things like that over the next few years. So that'll be good fun. And yeah. So yeah, just have a good time.
Well, thank you
really.
so much for talking to us. Yeah, it sounds, I mean, you've got a lot of awesome stuff, and thank you for reaching out. And like, you know, I think we're going to be talking about some ideas for future guests for this show.
Yeah, I've done the sort of the circuit podcast, so I've got some good guys I can punt your way.
Awesome.
And the main message is for anybody who's struggling with booze or drugs or has a family member who's struggling with it, there's never been a better time to do this sobriety thing, because there's AA's still there. That's fine. Do that. Atheist AA, if you're science-minded, they're very, very warm and very open-minded. And then Smart Recovery and the Sinclair method, the options are incredible. So don't give up. That's the main thing I want people to know, is this can be done. So then it's a good time to do it.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.